What's going on, everybody? This is Jeff Hillen with Selling Stories, where we discuss the struggles, successes, and life lessons learned through sales and in sales. And we got a treat. We got Jordan Steffy. What's going on, Jordan?
How are we doing, Jeff? Good to see you, buddy.
You as well. You as well. So, for all of you that don't know Jordan, which there's maybe a handful of you, most people probably already do. He's a former quarterback of the Maryland Terrapins a few years ago, and he's doing a lot. I don't even want to try to tell too much of your story, so I'm going to let you do it. Jordan, if you don't mind, tell a little bit about who you are, what you do, and a little bit about your journey to get here.
Absolutely. So I am, a lot of my professional career and personal career, honestly, personal life is centered around impact. And so wearing a couple different hats right now, everything from nonprofit work to the venture capital space, where we focus on kind of the built environment and how do we innovate there as there's a lot of need in the way that we build, feed, and supply the world. And then I'm also, interested in kind of emerging technologies, and so advisor to a startup in the virtual reality space.
That's awesome. So, you have a little bit of everything, and you're interested in a little bit of everything. That's awesome. I've known Jordan for a while. I mean, I've known this guy back in high school. I actually had a locker next to him in basketball, even though, he played college football. He was a hooper back in the day. And I always felt like you were going to do big things. And I wanted to ask you, man, did you always feel like in life you were going to do big things? Did you feel like you were destined to do big things?
It's interesting. I think about in reflection and also kind of currently, right? And somebody helped me um, put a name to this. And I'm sure that a lot of your listeners, and maybe even you, Jeff, this might resonate. But there's a book called The Triple Package.
Okay.
And, some days I like to admit this, some days I don't, but I have the triple package. And here's what the triple package is. Most mornings when I wake up, I have three thoughts. The first thought, excuse my language, is I'm the shit.
I love it.
The second thought is I ain't shit. And the third thought is I'll just be better today than I was yesterday.
I like it.
And, the reality of it is like, there are these moments where I feel like I have this, I'm here for a reason. I've got this purpose, and then the next moment it's like, I don't know what the heck I'm doing. Do I have any skills? Do I have any value to add to this world?
Okay.
But I think the thing that just keeps me going is that it's like, what, one foot in front of the other. Get better today than you were yesterday. And as I talk to more and more people who have been able to do some cool things in life, that seems to be a theme that resonates with a lot of people.
When you have those thoughts, and I mean, I appreciate sharing. I've never heard anybody call it the triple threat that way, and I wasn't sure what you're going to say. I didn't think it was going to be that. That's fantastic. What continues to push you? When you find something that maybe you're really good at, or you've had some success at, what drives you to maybe keep looking at different areas, or dive in and learn more?
Yeah, I mean, I have an obsession with growth. There's and that can be a good thing and that can be a bad thing at times. And I think it's important, to pause in moments and reflect. And gratitude, I think, is everything. But at the same time, it's just, uh, nothing is good enough. And I on my Instagram profile, I have, the subject line is like, I live life blissfully discontent. And it's like, listen, there's a lot of great things. I'm so fortunate, so privileged in many ways. And yet every single day, it's like, I'm just thinking about what can I get better in? And that's what drives me.
That's cool. That's cool. And I know, just based on knowing you, you've dealt with some adversity in your life, and probably, you could probably do a whole episode or a whole podcast maybe on adversity for a lot of people. But I was hoping you could share with some people maybe some specific stories of some of the adversity you went through, whether it was, your trip to get into college, or while you're at college, or anything else you feel like is worth sharing, just for everybody to hear about your story.
Absolutely. So, it's not lost on me that we've all been through things, right? And personally for me, went through adversity in many cases, growing up, as far as I had an amazing mom who raised me as a single mom for the most part. Um, we grew up with enough but modest means. Um, and so there's just kind of that realities. I think honestly, in hindsight, one of the biggest adversities or kind of friction points in my life was growing up being biracial,
Hmm.
and having a black father and a white mother, and really just trying to navigate identity. And it felt like I was in a bunch of these different spaces, and I never quite fit in anywhere, and yet I kind of had some connection. And that even to this day is something that I'm unpacking and really trying to grapple with and understand. What has ended up happening is I've realized there's such a gift in that, and this ability to bridge communities and to bridge, you know, people with different points of view in the world has been a huge benefit to me, and hopefully to some others as well. But um,
Yeah.
as I got to college, went through certainly some adversity. Transitioning to college was rough for me. I'll never forget walking into a lecture hall with 500 people and every person knowing who you are.
Hmm.
And that's amazing after a good game. It's not so fun after one that didn't go so well.
Yeah,
And my first 2 years in college weren't the greatest. We weren't as successful as any of us would have liked. So the point is I think some of those adversities were there. One of the things that happened my freshman year, which not a lot of people know about, is I was hit by a car, um, and the car was going 55 miles an hour. It ran a red light, and I was walking across the street just off campus, and I saw it out of the corner of my eye. I jumped, and that's the last thing I remember. Went through the windshield, and that was my freshman year. And I was fortunate. I remember waking up in the hospital and um, just can't, not believing that something like that could happen to me, and not believing that in some cases that I was still alive, etc. And so lots of adversity. I think the most important thing is that, um, and I think the world is waking up to this. I think the people who've been through the most have a chance to go the farthest.
that's
And
cool. Yeah.
for me, it's always been about what's the lesson in this? How can I use this as an opportunity to grow and get better? And just this realization that, like, when you go through challenging things, it's really conditioning you to be able to endure, and not just through adversity, also through what it takes to be great at anything as well. And I think there's actually a lot of the same muscles that need to be flexed to bounce back from bad things, but also to really go above and beyond when it's not necessary.
That's cool, man. I haven't heard anybody say it like that, and I appreciate you telling the personal part of your story because I know it's not easy for a lot of people to convey, and you do it with grace. And I think it's something that, like you said, more and more people, I hope, in today's society, in today's world, are feeling comfortable about just being transparent about what they're going through. And it's interesting, from the outside in, I would tell you, hopefully you'll find this funny. When we were in high school, and I will tell everybody, Jordan was a fantastic athlete. And one thing I always appreciate about you is your work ethic, because there's a lot of people in today's world that don't necessarily play multiple sports. They stick to one and that's it. And I always appreciate how hard you worked in basketball. You were 1,000 point scorer, captain of our team. One thing I didn't appreciate though was I had a girlfriend in Solanco, and even though I was dating her, she said she thought you were good looking and was wondering, if I could talk to you for her. So, so that
My
part of it I
bad.
didn't. No, no, no. It's all fair. It's all fair. So no, it's funny that it's funny we're talking now, and this story for a lot of sales guys, and you kind of alluded to that, is there's highs and lows in life, but in sales too. And I guess kind of continuing on that, if you have somebody that is going through a struggle and they're not really sure how to get out of a funk, or they lost a big deal, what advice would you have for them in that moment, or how to get out of it?
Yeah, to me, it's about, I think there's a couple of ways, I like to have a couple different options as it relates to getting out of funks or kind of generating momentum. Number one, I think is to me is extremely important, is understanding what the purpose is, right? What is the why? And I think sometimes it feels cliche, but if you're not doing something that you're deeply passionate about, if you're not doing something that you believe actually has a positive impact on the world, I think it's hard to get out of ruts and slumps. But I think for most of us, and probably most of your audience, we are living in our purpose. Um, and as a result of that, I think, to me, when I think of the impact I want to have in this world, when I realize how finite our time is here, that oftentimes will get me going. But the second, another approach that I tend to have is just like, and I forget who said it, but you know, just erring on the side of action and activity. And it's just like, if you shoot enough shots, at some point they start falling.
Hmm.
But unless you keep firing, you can't generate that momentum. And so for me, it's just like, err on the side of action, err on the side of activity, and then trust that at some point the shots start falling. So I'd say those are the two things that I tend to really focus on as it relates to getting out of ruts or generating momentum.
Yeah, and I would say in sales, it is there's ruts and then there's high points. And for me, I think if you're successful too much, you're probably not pushing yourself enough. I think if
Absolutely.
you are winning all the time, you're probably comfortable in the space and you're really not growing. Like you said, you're obsessed with growth. I think you have to be willing to push yourself in life and sales. And the only way to get through that is through pain and through endurance and difficult times. And then when you come on the other side, you're stronger for it, you're better for it. And it's hard in the moment, but in hindsight, I think everything that we do in life is worthy when it's hard to get there. When it's given to you, it doesn't feel as good. So I would say that for all the salespeople out there.
Absolutely. And I think two things come to mind with you mentioning that. I live in a neighborhood here that has a lot of successful people in it. And one of the things that caught my attention when we moved here was that in the summer and the spring and the fall, it's pretty nice outside. There's a lot of people running. In the winter, there's a lot of people running.
Hmm.
And to me, I get really excited with all weather winners.
Yeah.
It's really really easy to make the phone call when you've got a lot of momentum. It's really really easy to make the phone call when a lot of people are saying yes. To me, there's just something that's very personal about when it's dark, when it's cold, when things aren't going my way, and that's just a thing of me versus me, me between me.
Yeah.
And so over the course of time, I've really kind of built just into who I am, that I actually get really, really, excited when, the conditions are adverse.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And I know part of the one thing I wanted to ask you, and it kind of goes segues into that a little bit, is when you're younger or you haven't gone through some things, you sometimes need mentors to help. And I feel like you specifically as someone that has had some really great mentors in your life. And I was hoping that maybe you could talk about one or two. I'm sure you have many, but if
Yeah.
you could talk about one or two and maybe a story or two about something you were going through and maybe how that relationship started or how they helped you through something.
Absolutely. The first mentor that I had is actually a fellow alumni of, from Conestoga Valley, Daryl Daniel. And, I met Daryl when I was in eighth grade. And, quite frankly, Daryl was maybe the first person I ever met who, was a person of color, who had a college degree, who drove, a Lexus with rims on it, who listened to the same music that I did,
Yeah.
and that I felt this real connection to. And, one of the things that Daryl did for me, which I've tried to kind of pay forward and pass forward in some of the nonprofit work that I do, is he loved me to success. He didn't love me to death. And the interesting thing is they look the same and feel the same at the beginning. But to me, loving someone to success and mentoring someone to success is really around empowerment. It means accountability. It means honest and critical feedback at times. Um, and he provided that. And I knew that it was coming from a place of care and a place of love. And so, Daryl was the first mentor that I had. As time went on, I can point to a handful of people who, you know, they changed the trajectory not only of my life but my family's life as a result of their generosity and their willingness to share their insights and advice.
Do you feel like you soak or seek those people out, or did you feel as if maybe some of the positions you were in, some of these mentors just organically came into your life?
I've been told, which was actually good to hear and good to know, is that you know people have been willing to mentor me for two reasons. Number one is they genuinely believed that I wanted to learn, um, and that I was open to learning, and that quite frankly it wasn't a waste of their time. But the
Hmm.
second thing that I didn't realize was that people have told me that not only do I receive, but I look to add value to their lives. And, I think any relationship has to be give and take. And I think one of the mistakes that people make when they have someone who, spends a little bit of time and is willing to kind of invest in them is that it's all take, and they don't seek ways to add value to them. And so I think those have been two things that I've done well that have led to people wanting to mentor me, and then for those mentoring relationships to actually endure and last over time.
Yeah, and I 100% agree. I know I've talked to some other people, and I have very similar values and traits in that space that you do. The other thing I would tell people is, you know, actions speak louder than words. And to me, it feels as if you mentioned about not wasting your time. There's a lot of people that are looking for mentors, and there's these mentors that they have, a finite amount of time, and the reality is, like you said, they have to pick and choose where they value and where they see people that they think can make an impact either for them or for other people. So if you're willing to show by your actions that you're worthy of their time, it's a lot easier to have them respect that. If you're begging for their time and you, like you said, kind of put a waste on it because you don't follow through or you don't show up, you don't do what you say you're going to do, I mean, it spreads. So I would say I totally agree with you. And I guess my question for you on top of that would be for salespeople in general. Um, Especially if somebody's struggling in sales, do you have any advice for someone that may be struggling in sales and how they could find a mentor or latch on to somebody that's successful?
I think that don't necessarily know that I have a direct, or a good answer to that. One of the things that I think helps is, showing that you're doing everything you can for yourself as well, right? And, for people to want to support and to mentor, I think the first step is for them to see that you're giving genuine effort, right?
Hmm.
Um, and I think it's also helps for you to be able to articulate gaps that you have. So people can quickly identify, all right, here's where I can add value in this person's life as a mentor. Um, but one of the other things that I think just in sales generally that I believe is critical, and to me this is like the one thing, right?
Yeah.
If the promise is clear, the price is easy. Our responsibility in selling anything, in influencing anyone, is to make the promise so clear, to make the value proposition so clear that the price becomes easy. And what I've learned is that 9 times out of 10, when you're struggling to get traction in whatever you're selling, the value proposition isn't there, or it's convoluted and there's too much and people can't wrap their minds around it, and you're not making it easy for someone to say yes. And so for me, it's counterintuitive, but we hear it all the time. It's less is more. How do I package whatever it is that I'm selling in the most simple way for people to say yes to it and then say no more?
Yeah.
And I think that becomes, it has been very effective for me in selling over the years.
Dude, I might just have to stop my podcast altogether. I'll just tell everybody, listen, go to Jordan Steffy's podcast, go to like minute 15, 16, listen for 2 minutes, listen to the advice. And if you screw it up, go back, hit rewind, play it again. Screw up, hit rewind, play again. Dude, that was awesome, man. I couldn't say any better. So listen, if you're in sales, if you're in life, listen to that advice and apply it accordingly, because that is some great freaking advice.
Hmm.
Um, transitioning through life, we all go through stages, and I think we evolve. We may not fully change, but I think, again, growing up, you envision certain things, then you get to those levels, and a lot of times you're not satisfied. You envision bigger things, and so I'd say that in general, dealing with success for you, what have you learned yourself about dealing with success, and what has that been like?
I mean, it's cliche in that, people talk about the process being everything, but I've I think for the last 3 or 4 years have been in this space where it truly is all about process. And, the outcome is a byproduct of the work that we put in, the fun that we have during the process, etc. Um, and so to me, that's just top of mind, right now.
Do you have any specific story that you can think where you worked really hard and something came as far as the result in success and maybe what you learned through that process or through that story?
I think Tom Brady said it, is that, winning, it's not that winning feels so good, it's that losing hurts so bad.
Okay.
There's always something else. There's always another mountain to climb, right? Whether it was getting a Division I scholarship, for a good amount of time, that was all I cared about.
Mm-hmm.
Um, then it was, could I get into an Ivy League school for graduate school? That's all I cared about. And then it was, could I make $100,000 a year? It was all I cared about. And then it was, could I make $250,000 a year? It was all I cared about. And you just keep going, and you realize that there will always be another mountain to climb. And
Mm-hmm.
so for me, I'd say, what I've learned about success is there's always the next success. Um, and so that's where this idea of, if it's always just about climbing the next mountain, the reality of it is you're going to spend most of your life dissatisfied. Um, and so, how do you find something that the process is just as exciting as the prize? And how do you spend a lot of time doing that?
Yeah. And you kind of alluded to the enjoyment of the process, maybe not on the result. In sales, you're going to have big wins, you're going to have, difficult losses to get through. Is there any advice you would have for somebody that does have that either big success and maybe not to dwell on it, or that crushing defeat where they banked it, they felt like it was a done deal and it felt like the carpet got pulled out at the last second? Do you have maybe a situation where you went through one of those specifically and how you handled it and maybe some advice from that?
Absolutely. Um, I think the failure one is easy to think about. I've had so many. And if you would audit all the things I've tried, the amount of things that have gone my way are, 1 out of 10, in most
Mm-hmm.
cases. But that's where I think, like setting really big goals matters, because if the goals are big enough, even if you hit 1 out of 10, it still becomes kind of life altering. But the other thing I think that's super important is just self awareness. And, for each of us, the things that drive us, the things that motivate us are different. What I've learned about myself, again, which is a gift and a curse, is that I can't be bought. There's just nothing good that can happen in my life where I'm going to say, all right, that's it. That's just not who I am. And
Mm-hmm.
so, you know, from now until, forever, it will be about getting up, identifying the 5 things that are important to me in my life, and working every single day to get better at those things. Starts for me with my faith, it then goes to my wife, and then goes to my kids, and then goes to, these things that I my that I earn an income with, that happen to be very purpose driven. Goes to my
Mm-hmm.
health, these types of things. And beyond that, some friendships. Beyond that, I don't have the capacity to do anything else really well, because all of my time and energy are in those 5 things that mean the most to me.
Well, that's cool you say that. And for a lot of salespeople, I think those defeats are less hurtful when you have the foundation of, what matters in your life. If you're banking everything, on your life on that one sale, I think it feels that much more crushing. If you have a support system, like you said, if you're aiming big, you're going to miss. You're going to miss. And if you have everything else in your life, at least I'd say most of what your life is feeling good. If you wake up and have a good routine, if you can look back at the process and feel like, hey, I did everything I could, I wouldn't have changed anything throughout my process. Yeah, if you're aiming big enough, your results aren't always going to be a W. And like I said earlier in this, if it's always a W, you probably aren't pushing yourself outside your comfort zone. So I think it's important what you alluded to. Everybody has the things that are important in their life. Your faith, your family, and if you're able to establish those relationships and make sure they're strong, the wins they're great, but that's not what's going to define you, and the losses aren't either. And I think it's really important that you brought that up, and I'm glad you did.
Absolutely.
So I know you mentioned about a lot of different projects, and when I looked at your LinkedIn recently, man, venture capitalism kind of popped up, and I just wanted to see if you could maybe just give some insight of what that means to you, and also I'm going to ask you a question about maybe the best pitch, or if you want to say the worst pitch you ever heard while doing it.
Absolutely. So, venture capital simplified is, making investments in early stage companies. And as a result of that investment, you get, equity or ownership in that company. It's very risky because in many cases, these startups, are either pre-revenue or they're doing a little bit of revenue, but it's not very clear that they're going to be successful. And so
Mm-hmm.
you end up taking, you really bet on founders of these teams, that they have kind of a unique insight and point of view in the world, and that they understand their industry well. Um, and the industries that we're investing in right now, I think the world is waking up to, are extremely vulnerable, are these industries of production. So think agriculture, manufacturing, construction, supply chain. These are industries that make up 50% of the world's GDP. And yet they've received about 5% of venture capital investment over the course of the last 100 years. And so you have these critical industries that, by the way, we have a growing population, we've got growing consumption, and we've got a dying planet, right? That's kind of our
Yeah.
belief. And so we need innovation in some of these core industries. And so we're investing in startups that are trying to innovate, whether it be around robotics, whether it be around how to more effectively and environmentally friendly fertilize, our farmland, whether it be around kind of construction technology to make construction safer, you know, um, so anyway, those are the things that we're investing in. And so we talked to a bunch of entrepreneurs to get to your question around like some of the best or maybe the worst pitches. The truth is we actually see a lot of really good pitches. Very rarely are we going to see somebody who has a bad pitch. And even sometimes when maybe the delivery isn't the most polished or what have you, the person who's delivering it happens to be, a twice over PhD and is one of, 5 people in the world who could tackle this problem, right? So they're
Yeah.
really
So maybe
smart
their
people.
social skills aren't the best, but they might be the most smart person you've ever met in your entire life.
Exactly, exactly. But this is where it goes back to what I said as far as the best pitches. I love this saying, and I think it applies to a lot of areas of our life. I would give nothing for the simplicity on this side of complexity, but I would give everything for the simplicity on the other side of complexity.
It's
And
deep.
what that means is like, sure, I can make things simple because there's just no substance at all. Or I could grapple with all of the complexity of something and then bring it down to the most simple way of articulating that, making the promise clear. And the best pitches are people who take really complex things and make them very easy for people to digest and understand.
How would somebody, again, I'm just looking at this because I relate it back a little to sales. You're trying to reach people that you potentially don't have a network in, or you don't have a connection with. What can somebody do to get on your radar? And I'm not just saying you specifically, but just in general, if somebody's trying to reach out to someone that seems like they're not someone that'll easily take their phone call because they don't have their phone number, or someone that they don't know in their inner circle. So what would somebody do to reach somebody like yourself to get your attention? What steps could they take to help their cause?
So I think there's two things, right? One is I think there's something that's actually counterintuitive about what you're saying, which is I will take almost every call.
Okay.
And the reason I'll take almost every call is because I haven't forgotten what it's taken for me to get here. And I don't think I'm unique in that. I think there are a lot of people who have influence, who've done well for themselves, who don't forget that they were the one picking up the phone, cold calling. They were the one outreach, on LinkedIn to somebody they didn't know. And so
Hmm.
that I think is something that's actually counterintuitive. To the people who you actually can't get through, I think it's always about making yourself as interesting and appealing as you possibly can. And, whether that's superficial things like just having a really clean LinkedIn profile, or social media or what have you, I think that those things certainly help. But I also think, introductions um, are the best way, right? And it's so,
Yeah.
you might not have a direct access to the person you're trying to connect with, but who do you know that does? Where
Yeah.
does that warm lead come from? To me, I found those things to be as effective as possible. And then, the last thing I'll say here is like on outreach, again, brevity is key. Sending someone a book is not going to get a response. Being to the point, saying something that's kind of interesting or intriguing, or articulating your value proposition very, very clearly and concisely, that's the way that you get someone to respond.
That's great. And one thing that concerns me a little bit, I see a lot now, there's such a movement in technology. You have chat GPT and a lot of things out there. And one thing I would say, me personally, and I know there's probably a lot of people that are against what I'm telling you, but my feelings are simple things such as making the effort personal, saying thank you, writing letters, being appreciative of people's support when they're not in the need to buy, things that probably don't seem too sexy, but you're going to stand out. And again, there is a lot of technology, there's a lot of software out there that can maybe make your job easier. But for the people you're really trying to make an impact for, is that what you want to do to try to reach them? Or do you want to use a robot for an automated message to reach them? Or do you want them to feel like you made it personal? And to me, I think it's important you make it personal and make it show as if there's nothing else more important than you trying to connect with them because you feel like you can provide value or you can help them solve a problem.
I agree. I agree. I think you're spot on. I think something else that um, should never be overlooked is just persistence, right? You know, if somebody is busy, they there's a good chance they're not going to get back to you the first time you message them, or the second, or the third. And there's always a fine line between being too persistent, right? But
Yeah.
number one is I think persistence is everything. The second thing, to your point, I'm in a small group and we were looking at it was the CEO of a company, and essentially they had the criteria for them to select their next CEO. They were doing some succession planning. And what was fascinating to your point was there were 7 categories. Five of the 7 categories were like interpersonal skills, communication skills, those types of things that you're referring to that can't be replaced by chat GPT or anything else. And so I think what people call soft skills, which I think are strong skills, are
Yeah.
critical. I think those things like following up and like thanking, the objective is to create raving fans in what you're doing. And I think oftentimes we're so eager to get on to the next client that we miss an opportunity to really put the stamp on showing someone that we value their service, we value them taking a chance on us. And the difference between a client and a raving fan is the referral. And
Hmm.
if you have a client, they might pay you, they might come back, maybe they don't. If you have a raving fan, they'll most likely come back the next time and they'll refer you to someone else. And that's how you really start to perpetuate sales and getting momentum in your business.
That's huge. That is absolutely huge. And I will tell everybody out here, I knew Jordan was going to be a tough person to lock down just because of how busy he is. And I know you have a family, and I super, super appreciate you taking time and away from everything else you could be doing. So thank you. But I knew it wasn't going to take one time, not because Jordan wouldn't help me, but because he's got other people asking him to do a lot. So, I followed up with Jordan, and even to do something like this, it doesn't fall on deaf ears knowing that, you're telling your story for other people to impact. And I know that's really where you're willing to take your time for it. But you still have to be able to show someone that you care. And if I just used a robot to do that, I don't think you would have said yes. So again, I really appreciate you did, but it takes a little bit more effort than once, especially for the people that matter. And you matter to me, Jordan. So I was willing to take as many times as it was going to take to get you here. So thank you.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate it. And you did some things in your follow up that I think are thoughtful and I'm sure intentional that that and also effective. I can tell you that everything from just kind of updates on other podcasts and things like that that kind of creates this FOMO, quite frankly, type
Yeah.
energy. So I thought that was thoughtful. But the other thing I'll tell you, and the real reason why I said yes to this was, um, you know, the one thing that stands out to me about you was just effort. And I remember and I think you're a year or so behind me, but
Yep.
I just remember in basketball feeling like anytime you were on the court, A, the fundamentals were undeniably going to be covered, but B, like the hustle and the effort would always be there. And as somebody who prides myself on effort and hustle, that's always stuck with me that you were somebody who always went above and beyond as it related to effort.
No, I appreciate that, man. And I will tell you, I feel like my body remembers all those charges I took for when you let your defender go by you when you didn't steal it. So you're welcome.
Thank you.
I'm just kidding. Jordan was really good on defense.
That's
Um,
hilarious.
hey, man. So I got a couple questions I ask everybody, and I wanted to get your opinion. Do you have a favorite business book? I know you probably read a lot, but is there one specifically that stands out to you?
Gosh, there's so many. One I just finished that I think is really good is called Unreasonable Hospitality.
Okay.
And there's another book that is called The Power of Moments. And then the third one I'll give you is a book called Setting the Table. And all of them really have this theme and that's so relevant to sales, which is again in these relationships with your clients, how do you make moments and experiences that they remember, that they feel seen, that they feel appreciated, which ultimately lead to them not only being repeat business but also being people who refer you to others.
Yeah, no, and what you said there is critical. I think a lot of people sometimes things get lost on us that are the most obvious for others, but these books or these podcasts or things that are out there are great reminders of just kind of using that daily or weekly remembrance of the things you need to continue to work on yourself so that you can grow. And somebody that clearly reads a lot of books, you're someone that probably knows it already, but just taking yourself to another levels or reminding yourself is crucial. And I think it's important for people to recognize that. And I definitely want to check out some of those books because they hit home exactly what you're talking about.
They're good. They're good.
You mentioned some people earlier, but I was curious, is there somebody that sticks out to you in the business world specifically for someone that means a lot to you and why that would be?
There's somebody here locally named Dale High in Pennsylvania who's been somebody who's means a lot to me. I have a deep respect for not just the success he's had, but the way he's realized that success. Really cares about people, really thinks long term, and really has a heart for philanthropy. And so Dale
Hmm.
High is certainly somebody who I think the world of. But I'm working with a lot of young founders as well, who are just really people centered, um, really hard workers, and have really big, audacious goals and visions. And so, Ryan Miller is somebody in Pennsylvania who has a company called Brennell Miller, and it's a jewelry store. But he's just a really solid business person. And yeah, I could list a bunch of people, but those are a couple that come to mind.
No, that's awesome. And the last question I would have for you is if somebody's thinking about getting into sales or maybe they're struggling in sales, what advice would you have for them?
I would have, my advice would be, again, come up with a really big why and purpose and get really, really clear on what the promise is of your product. I think those two things can kind of get some momentum started.
Yeah, man. You listen, you're a fantastic guy. And again, I think I'm excited. I said this before, I'm excited to catch back up with you because I know of how many big things that you are doing in your life, that you have done in your life. For people that want to find out more about you after listening to this podcast, where's a way for them to either connect with you or kind of follow your story after this?
Absolutely. So on Instagram, Jordan_Steffy, and then on LinkedIn, Jordan Steffy.
All right, everybody, listen, this was going to be maybe the hardest show to beat if you want to rank them. I'm a competitive guy, so I like ranking things. I don't want to, put too much blast on anybody else that gets on one of these things. But Jordan, you were unbelievable, and I knew you were going to be great, and it's even better than I thought you would be. So I can't look forward, or I can't say thank you enough, and I look forward to continuing to watch your journey. So thank you for doing this.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on, and congrats on the early success and momentum you're generating.
No, man, I appreciate it. Well, everybody, again, this is Jeff Hillen signing out with Jordan Steffy, selling stories. Till the next time, appreciate it and come back. Thank you.